Ondrej Palat, the veteran piece for the Devils, one of their alternate captains, did not have a good showing in year one of his 5-year contract. However, I still have some hope that he can be a solid player for the Devils moving forward. We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils, and we're going to hear from Ondrej himself. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. In today's episode, we're going to talk about a player who was one of my 3 stars of the game against the Philadelphia Flyers in the New Jersey Devils' first preseason matchup. A player I anticipate to have a bounce-back year, one of the Devils' alternate captains, the long-time veteran player, Ondrej Palat. So in the first segment, I'm going to recap his 2022-2023 season. Then in the second segment, I will go into more detail regarding my expectations for him, because even though his first year a part of the Devils organization didn't go as planned, I still think he has some solid contributions in his bag to try to help the Devils win more games. And obviously, the weight that he carries in the locker room, I think it can be translated onto the sheet of ice. And then in the third and final segment, we're going to shift course a little bit, and I'm going to give some acknowledgement to a player I really should have mentioned in yesterday's episode. So to begin with Ondrej Palat, let's go back to the beginning when he first signed his 5-year, $30 million deal with the Devils during the summer of 2022. We know how that story panned out. Johnny Gaudreau elected to sign with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Devils had to go to their plan B option. Palat was still on the table. His agency probably forced the Devils to fork up some more money before they threatened to find their business elsewhere. So ultimately, Palat signed on the dotted line, and he was sort of used as collateral for some of the key impact players that the Devils unfortunately missed out on during the 2022 offseason. Now, what were the expectations for Ondrej Palat himself? Well, if I had to make an educated guess, when you think of those Tampa Bay Lightning Stanley Cup runs, obviously, here's some players that might come to mind, and forgive me if I'm missing a few players. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. Obviously, you think of Steven Stamkos, you think of Braden Point, you think of Victor Hedman, you think of Nikita Kucherov, you think of Andrei Vasilevsky, but you don't really think about Ondrej Palat all that much. I think it's quite evident that Palat was one of the more underrated players during those Stanley Cup final runs for the Lightning organization. So I think his mindset with signing with a younger team like the Devils, I think he foresaw himself having a big role offensively. And I even predicted it going into the 2022-2023 season that I anticipated for Palat to be one of the go-to guys for Devils. And I was expecting for him to have a career year, but obviously we know how that story kind of unfolded, and some of it wasn't really on him. So what were some of the highlights for Palat? Well, I think one of the key highlights that I can think back to, it goes to the beginning of the year against the Anaheim Ducks. The Devils are already 0-2 to begin the season. They're in desperate need of a win. Obviously, Lindy Ruff is hearing it from the Devils discourse up in the stands. Rumors were circulating. It was clear that the Devils needed a win, and they needed it pronto. So against the Ducks, Palat was able to score, and he was one of the engines that was driving the Devils to try to get their first win of the season and basically just get out of that rut. And then the Devils ended up winning their next game, and then they won another game. So they started off the year 3-2. Then they fall to a 3-3 record. But after that, the Devils went on a 13-game win streak. But here's the problem. Ondrej Palat was not a part of the 13-game win streak. And that kind of created some sort of problem, because it's just like the Devils are playing so well, but Palat has become an afterthought. Now you have to raise the question, like, how is the lineup going to look when he's inserted back into the lineup? So what went wrong for Palat? Well, he had to have groin surgery, and that sidelined him for a good period of time. And once again, we kind of forgot about Palat and his overall capabilities. I even had to scrap my idea of him possibly having a career year. But the one thing I could say for Palat is that I think another main reason why he wanted to sign with the Devils is that he was going to have a big leadership role, because I want people to know that veteran leadership should not be overlooked. And it goes for Brendan Smith. It goes for Erik Haula. It goes for Ondrej Palat. Those key additions that the Devils made during the 2022 offseason. It's not just the production on the sheet of ice. It's what happens in the locker room. So even though Palat's first season with the Devils didn't really go as planned, I think we can't underutilize like his true impact in terms of just being a leader. And that's why he's one of the alternate captains on the team. Now, personally, I think Erik Haula deserves it a little more than him, but he's still a guy who has championship pedigree. He's been through the fire before, and it was one of the reasons why I was excited that he was joining the Devils, because I just looked at a player that could just pull up the troops by the bootstrings and just say, like, let's get out of this muck. Let's get out of this rut that we're having. And we saw it very early in the year in which he was able to score against the Ducks that kind of helped the Devils get their first win of the season. But in terms of the final stats for Palat, he finished off with 8 goals, 15 assists for a grand total of 23 points. Here's some stats that he kind of was in the high rankings for in the Devils. He had 44 blocks, which ranked 11th on the team. He had 70 hits, which ranked 8th. So a pretty mediocre to bad year for Palat. Now, the big question mark was, could he step up his game during the playoffs? Because I said all could be forgiven if he's able to just thrive in the playoffs. And he did play a crucial role for the Devils in round 1 against the New York Rangers. And he was one of the reasons why the Devils were able to make it past the first round. I'm not saying he was like one of the star players or anything, but he definitely contributed, and he was able to redeem himself in some sort of categories, because in Game 7, he was able to rack up 2 assists. So he had a multi-point productive game. But come the second round against the Carolina Hurricanes, similar to a lot of his other teammates, he sort of shut down, and I don't think that's the way he wanted to end the season. So if I had to describe Palat's season with one word, I'd say disappointment on his end, and I think for the fans' perspective as well, because I think it's safe to say that everyone expected more from Palat, and I'm sure Palat expected more from himself, but unfortunately, injuries are just something you can't really control. He had to have groin surgery, sidelined him for a few months. So, and with the Devils having that amount of success, it's similar to Mackenzie Blackwood's situation, which was sometimes when the team is succeeding without your contributions, it's kind of hard to just like slide back into it and try to fit comfortably, because you're kind of disrupting the mojo, even if that's not your intent. But at the end of the day, Palat is still here for 4 more years. And given the fact that he was able to recover during the offseason, I have some mild expectations for Palat going into the 2023-2024 season. I think he could be a solid contributor on the Devils' bottom 6. Now, he is sort of overpaid to be a bottom 6 player. But at the same time, like I said, since the Devils were succeeding and they made some changes to their roster, this is the hand that's just been fed to Palat and what the situation is like for the meantime. But I don't think it's worst case scenario. Now, we're going to talk about my expectations for Palat momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about FanDuel, because hockey is back and I want you guys to make some extra cash. But I think a lot of you are also football fans. So go Jets, go Giants, whomever you root for. Snap back into the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over and unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. And while you're at it, visit FanDuel.com. And why don't you bet on some Devils, money lines, props, etc. But please remember to do so responsibly. Okay, so let's shift the focus from recapping last season for Palat to now moving on into the future, because once again, year 1 of 5 is already in the books. Didn't really go as planned, but I want to relate Palat's situation to one of his current teammates. But before I do, here's a soundbite that I obtained from Palat months ago about him talking about his health, if he was 100% to finish off the rest of the year and during the playoffs. Here was his response.
I don't think anybody was 100% in the playoffs, but yeah. I mean, it was my first surgery like that, and the groin is such a weird area or important area for skating, so it took me a little bit of time to get to 100%, but in the playoffs I felt okay or good.
I think a lot of people can tell you that if you suffer a major injury, especially during the season, early on, middle, late, it doesn't really matter. There's really no time to recover fully from it. That's why you usually wait until the offseason to really recoup and regain control of your bearings. So I think the same can be said for Palat and his situation. But like I said moments ago, let's relate his situation to one of his current teammates, and that is Dougie Hamilton. So if you guys recall, Dougie Hamilton also signed a lengthy deal with the Devils during the 2021 offseason, and we had a lot of expectations for Dougie going into the 2021-2022 season, because here's a guy who was a finalist for the Norris Trophy, and he has some big offensive production for a defenseman. So a lot of people were happy that Dougie was a part of the Devils roster, but we know what happened in year 1 for Dougie Hamilton, which was the main talking point midseason. He suffered a facial fracture, had to get surgery, and he was sidelined for a good chunk of the season, and he never really recovered from it. And then Hamilton later on revealed that it was kind of hard for him to eat. He lost some weight. He never really was at 100% strength, and he was also dealing with some other nagging injuries. So Hamilton was just waiting for the offseason to fully recover. And then what happens in year 2 of Hamilton being a part of the Devils organization? He is now one of the top 50 players in the NHL, according to NHL Network, and he's well on his way to getting his name back into the running for the Norris Trophy, in my opinion. Now, albeit if you don't get a player like Erik Karlsson gunning for like 150 points as a defenseman, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but you get the point I'm trying to make. You get hyperbole. But anyway, as I'm just trying to say is like, I think Dougie Hamilton's situation is perfectly relatable to Ondrej Palat's situation, because here are two impactful players that signed big deals with the Devils, and unfortunately, year 1 didn't go as planned. Now, obviously, for Dougie's situation, it hurt the Devils more ways than one, because Dougie wasn't just the only Devils player that was dealing with injury, but for Ondrej, it's just like people are quick to bash on him just because the Devils were successful without his contribution. And now it feels like he's taking up a roster spot. He's overpaid. He's a bottom 6 player, and he's being paid $30 million total. So it's just like people are a little more impatient when it comes to Palat. But I'm just here to say, I think Palat can definitely have a decent impact on this roster. Now, before I give my opinions on what I can anticipate from Palat this upcoming year, here's what he told me when I asked him, like, how does he want to be utilized going forward? I got this soundbite once again months ago. Check it out.
Obviously, there's a lot of talent on this team, and I know you were out for a significant amount of time due to injury. How do you foresee yourself being utilized in the future?
I mean, yeah, you said that when I signed here. I told you guys, media, that I will play whenever coach is gonna put me. Hopefully, it's in the important role. Doesn't matter if it's PP or penalty kill. So yeah, I just want to be important piece here on the team.
So this sort of segues into my next talking point in this segment, which is just the good start that Ondrej has gotten off to so far. But before we talk about that, he said during that soundbite that he'll play wherever coach wants to play him. And I remember asking him that question either in late December or early January when he returned from his groin surgery. I said, where do you see yourself best sliding in now that the Devils are winning games more consistently? They have their eyes set on the playoffs. The season is almost halfway over. Obviously, it's a bit of an interesting situation that you're going to have to put yourself in. And his answer was the same thing he said in December or January compared to what he said during exit interviews when I spoke to him, which was he just wants to go where coach tells him to go. And that's a good sign of leadership from Palat, willing to just take a bit of a backseat role in order to help the team win. But still, I think Palat is off to a good start for the time being. And I don't want to read too far into it because, as you guys know, I try to take training camp, I try to take preseason with a grain of salt. They're scrimmages. They're just meant to like get the players back into a mojo, into a rhythm. But digressing a little bit, it's been quite clear that the Devils media is very fond of Palat and what he was able to do for the time being. And quite honestly, I'm no exception because I literally said in my episode from yesterday that Palat was one of my 3 stars of the game just because he was able to go backdoor and finish on a great feed from Jesper Bratt. And I think that goal meant a lot to him because it's just like he still got it. He still can contribute for this roster. It was just going to take some time and also a lot of recovery period. And that's what you do during the offseason. So I'm really happy that Ondrej Palat was able to just get off to a decent start. And once again, a lot of Devils media personnel have been saying that Palat has been impressive during training camp when the Devils are doing their inner squad or workouts, individual workouts, whatever the case might be. Personally, I was not in attendance for any of the training camp days, but luckily I have some great colleagues and associates who were in attendance. And I've been informed that Palat has been performing well during training camp. So I'm glad that Palat, similar to Alexander Holtz, is getting off to a pretty good start. Now, to close out this segment, what are my expectations for Palat? Here's where I think Palat's role is going to best thrive. I think at this point, he has to be a solid contributor, which is, I think he has to be a middle six type of player in which he's able to put up some decent numbers. And I think he's capable of doing so now that he is fully healthy. Now it's the start of a new year. Now the Devils will have time to try to say like, okay, here's where he best fits in. And we don't have to like throw him into the fire because now everyone starts back at square one to begin the new year. So my thing for Ondrej Palat, I still think he can be a very good contributor on the roster for the Devils. I think he can provide some scoring on the third line if it's not coming off the stick of Erik Haula or Alexander Holtz, Graham Clark, Nolan Foote, whatever the case might be, whoever is going to like fill out that other role winger on the third line. But digressing a little bit, I think Palat can definitely be the go-to guy for the Devils on the third line, and I think we could still see a boost in his numbers. Now, something I said in segment 1 was that I think Palat had the expectation of being one of the go-to guys for the Devils, but unfortunately, he has now become the victim of the Devils' success, and now he's a bottom 6 player being annually paid of $6 million, $30 million total for the next few seasons. But anyway, I still have faith in Palat. I know people look to his contract and look to his role and just say he might be overrated or overpaid, whatever the case might be. But remember, it was a different time for the Devils not too long ago. So I just want to keep people honest in that regards. But I think Palat is still going to have a pretty good year for the Devils. And I have faith that we're going to see year 2 wound up much better for Palat in the end-all be-all. Okay, so let's talk about a player that I really should have talked about in yesterday's episode, and I realized it as soon as I was editing. I was like, I should have just given him a shout out at least, even if I wasn't going to make him one of my 3 stars or honorable mention, but that is Kevin Bahl, because Kevin Bahl, similar to a lot of other younger guys on the roster for the Devils, they're trying to fight for a roster spot. They're trying to fight for an everyday role. And I think that's what Kevin Bahl is doing at this point, because Bahl is going to make the opening night roster, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. But the problem is like, what's his role going to be? And I think Sam Kassan said it best on air when the Devils were playing the Flyers, which is, I think the plan for Bahl and his skill set is that he's going to like play like, say, 4 or so straight games. And on the 5th game, if he's struggling or if he just doesn't have any good momentum going his way, then he'll be a healthy scratch for the next couple games, it'll basically be a rotating door on that bottom 4 defensive role. But James Nichols actually shared this on the X app. He said, if this is the Kevin Bahl the Devils are getting, consider the shoes that left in the summer filled. So he's referring to like Damon Severson, Ryan Graves, because the main question was like, who's going to fill up some of those defensive roles for the Devils? Because for Severson, you get a good two-way player. For Graves, you get a player that's not really going to like put up big numbers in the score sheet, but is still very effective. And the plus minus and the defensive point share definitely backs it up in regards to Graves and his impact. And something that I also took note of was that similar to a lot of his teammates, Bahl was playing quite aggressive, because we saw Bahl have a huge hit on Wade Allison in the scrimmage against the Philadelphia Flyers, because he put Allison on his back, lit the candle, lit him up. So I love the aggression from Kevin Bahl, his size, his skating ability. It's just, it really shouldn't work the way it should work, but I'm definitely not going to complain about it. So Kevin Bahl really impressed me in the first matchup of the preseason, and I hope he can definitely carry it into the next one. So I love Bahl and his contribution. I think he's going to be a solid X Factor type player for the Devils on the bottom 4 defensive role. And I'm glad that the Devils signed him to that 2-year extension, because one of the things that I talked about back in the springtime was that if Bahl just played in more games, I think we would see a lot of his already decent stats and production just go up a little bit more. So I'm excited to see what Bahl can do this upcoming year. I apologize for not giving him a shout out in the previous episode. That is my mistake, and I will take full blame for that. I realized it when I was editing the episode that I should have given him a shout out, because even if people don't realize it in the score sheet, Bahl did have some solid productive reps for the Devils against the Flyers, and I hope once again it could carry over into the next preseason game. But let me know what you guys think about Kevin Bahl and his overall impact, and what did you think of the first 2 segments of the show, and what are your expectations for Ondrej Palat moving forward? Do you think he can have some productive seasons for the Devils? Have you lost hope in him? Curious to your guys' thoughts. So leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on the X page at TreyMatt4 or the show's personal X page at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.